Thank you for showing up. And with that, I recognize Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this important hearing. Thank you to the two generals for your distinguished service to our country. Thank you so very much for that. You know, General Milley, you mentioned how you had suggested a minimum of 2,500 troops to remain. Who rejected your advice? Was it the president? Did you ever get a written or oral feedback as to why they rejected that advice?
Well, again, I can't say, you know, the president said this, the president said that. That's beyond the scope of the law, actually, with executive privilege. But it's obvious that the president made the decision, and the president made an announcement on the 14th. And our recommendation was, as I mentioned, or our thoughts at the time was, as I mentioned. And every president has a right to make those decisions. He's looking at things from a much wider angle than a military angle. Our military assessment was keep 2,500, and with them, it's not just 2,500, it's 2,500 plus the NATO plus the contractors.
Right.
And the contractors are key here. And then that, we thought, our assessment was, that would keep the Afghan government, the military, stable until such time as a diplomatic outcome could occur in accordance with the conditions set in the Doha Agreement.
In retrospect, would that have made the difference?
I mean, we'll never know, I guess, because it didn't happen. So I do think, though, that I believe that the Afghan government, the Afghan security forces would not have collapsed in August of 21 had we maintained that posture. Those were high-end special forces capable of defending themselves and conducting operations as they had been for a while. And I think my assessment, probably moderate to significant risk on U.S. forces, but is that worth that risk? Again, the Doha Agreement had conditions, but here was the problem. For two presidents, nobody that I recall, nobody, zero, could coherently argue how it would end or how those conditions, the diplomatic conditions, were going to be obtained. Not a military problem, but how are those diplomatic conditions going to be obtained?
Let me just ask you, I asked Secretary of State Blinken on September of 2021 about the infamous phone call with Ghani, and Reuters did get a copy of that phone call, about the transcript and apparently an actual verbatim. They listened to it. And in it he said that there's a need, whether it's true or not, this is our President of the United States saying this, whether it's true or not, there's a need to project a different picture about the Taliban's capabilities. General McKenzie, you talked about how there was no plan to get U.S. citizens out. And then there seemed to be a bewilderment on the part of the administration why Americans weren't flocking to leave. They didn't have many ways of doing it anyway. And I'm just wondering what you thought of that phone call. I mean, I asked Blinken, he said, you know, I don't talk about something that's been leaked. Well, is it true? Did he say that? You know, lying like that to me, when you give the false impression to a whole group of Americans who never then got out, that's very, very serious. Secondly, just let me ask, because I will run out of time, how many Americans were left behind? And again, I thank you that you did everything you could to make this policy work, but you were given a policy that was egregiously flawed. But how many Americans were left behind? How many of our allies? And what has happened to them? Have they been beaten, killed, tortured? And secondly, about all the weapons that were left behind, there are reports that some of it has found its way to Hamas. I don't know if that's true. I know you did everything you could on the way out to destroy them, but many were intact and left in the hands of the Taliban.
I can't speak to the phone call. I don't have any personal knowledge of that. Number of Americans. This was always an issue. The number of Americans, as General McKenzie said, an F-77 report is supposed to, every ambassador in every country of the world keeps an F-77 report, and they're supposed to track the Americans, where they're at, the phone numbers, address, et cetera, in the country. That was always a difficult number for us in the Department of Defense to get a hold of, and I think it's true at the tactical level and operational level as well. And I'll be candid, I don't know the exact number of Americans that were left behind because the starting number was never clear. Same is true of at-risk Afghans, SIVs, the commandos, other Afghans that serve with us. Those numbers varied so widely that they were quite inaccurate, as best I could tell at the time. I would just say I'm not sure, even today, about the accuracy of all those numbers.
Are they in jail, dead, some of them?
I think some were killed. Afghans. I don't know about the Americans. I don't think the Americans were, but I think some of the Afghans were tracked down that worked with us, and I think some of them were killed, and I'm pretty certain some of them in pretty brutal ways. Some were managed to escape through various means. Others have just laid low and keeping their heads down.
Gentleman's time's expired.